All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. It's Anti-War Radio. I'm Scott Horton, and on the line is Richard Silverstein from the Tikun Olam blog, Make the World a Better Place, richardsilverstein.com. Welcome back to the show. Richard, how are you?
Hi, Scott. Good to be with you.
I really appreciate you making time for us today, and I want to start this interview by mentioning your fund drive. We're having a fund drive at antiwar.com this week, too. I figure we have that in common. I might as well bring it up. Support Tikun Olam, if I'm pronouncing that right, which I'm probably not, is the top entry here at your blog, richardsilverstein.com. And, boy, people are about to find out why it's worth it. Let's start with the fact that no matter what everybody else pretends, you broke the story that the Israeli Mossad and the Mujahideen communist terrorist cult bombed a missile depot of some kind in Iran the other day.
That's right. What happened was the Iranian Revolutionary Guards have a missile base about 25 miles outside of Tehran, and they were moving one of their biggest rockets. It's called a Shihab-3. And they had the cream of the crop of the IRG missile group there, and the missile exploded, and it killed 17 soldiers, including the top commander who oversaw all of Iran's most highly advanced missile technology and the whole missile program. And this act of sabotage was organized by the Mossad, and their operatives in the field that actually carried out the attack were the Mujahideen, which they also go by the initials MEK.
Mm-hmm. And the headline here, where you broke the story first, is Mossad-MEK may have bombed Iranian missile base, 40 dead and wounded. And you had an Israeli source that let you know this?
That's right. Someone who, with a senior political and military background in Israel, within 24 hours of the bomb blast, told me that the Mossad was involved with the MEK. I should also say that the Iranian government itself at first denied that it was sabotage and said that it was an accident and that it involved ammunition. However, yesterday, The Guardian reported a former Iranian government official confirmed that it was sabotage and not an accident. And now the BBC is reporting that the mayor of Tehran is also conceding that it was sabotage. So, when I first reported this story, I felt a little bit like an actor about to go on stage and looks down and make sure he has his pants on. And but now I feel my source was absolutely right in what he said to me, and really this confirms that there is a two-pronged strategy that Israel and the U.S. is following with regards to Iran. One track might be a direct military attack on Iran to try to take out their nuclear facilities, and the alternate approach is this Black Ops program, which has involved major acts of terror at missile bases. This was the second major explosion at a missile base. There was one a year ago that killed 18 Iranian Revolutionary Guard soldiers. There was at least 3 assassinations of nuclear scientists in and around Tehran, and an IRG military transport plane was dropped out of the sky a couple of years ago. And Israeli reporters who follow the security beat in Israel have reported that all of those were acts that the Mossad and the MEK had some hand in. So there seems to be this approach in Israel that if we don't want to do a full head-on military attack, then we'll try this black ops approach and see if we can delay the Iranians and take out some of their key brains in the nuclear program. And my take on this is that neither approach is going to work. The black ops approach to me is a substitute for having a real policy towards Iran. And it's not going to stop Iran from getting a nuclear bomb if that is what they do want to do. The only way to really address the Iranian nuclear threat, if you want to call it that, is by a negotiation between all the parties involved, and that's something that neither side seems to be interested in. So it just turns out to be a huge mess, really.
Mm-hmm. Well, one part of this that you highlight in, I forget which of your great blog entries here at richardsilverstein.com, is the question of whether this is terrorism or not. For this to happen, of course, when Hassan killed all those people at Fort Hood, that's considered terrorism enough that they can kill al-Awlaki for supposedly being in on it and all those kinds of things. And yet you talk about how some of the commenters, I guess, on your blog were saying this isn't terrorism because it's a military target, and you're saying, so what does that mean? It's an act of war, and we might as well go ahead and launch the full-scale thing here, or what? And that's the fire that they're playing with. This isn't some game blowing up military bases. Yeah,
that's a good point, because what I talk about in the blog, I talk about blowback, there seems to be this element in Israeli policy, and maybe even U.S. policy, that we can do whatever the hell we want to do to the Iranians, and that it's a free lunch, and there's no, we won't pay for anything that we do. But there's lots of different ways in which Israel may have to pay for doing things like this. There could be, one of the things I reported in my blog was a couple of years ago, Israel assassinated the then leader of Hezbollah, whose name was Abbas al-Musawi. And then a couple of weeks after that assassination, there was a major terror attack on the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires. And people who support Israel like to point to that attack in Buenos Aires and blame Hezbollah and blame the Iranians. And they, of course, do it out of context, and they don't mention what preceded the attack. So there's always a price.
I think, has cast serious doubt on that story and pointed instead at right-wing elements in the government.
I'm not saying, there's no proof ever been
your point still stands as far as the argument goes, I understand.
Exactly. There's going to be a price that you're going to pay. I mean, if you go and try to take out Iran's key scientists and their key military commanders, Iran is not going to sit back and say, go right ahead, take your best shot. They're going to respond in some way. So, and also, if the nations of the world see that Israel's policy really doesn't involve diplomacy, but rather involves assassinations and skullduggery and bomb explosions, the next time Israel needs a vote in the UN to try to stop Palestinian statehood or whatever the issue might be, the world is going to say, well, Israel is a terror state. Why would we want to vote in their favor in an international body? So it has all sorts of repercussions, and Israel tends to see things in a very short-term way and doesn't look at the long-term. And there always is a long-term in these matters, and this does not help them in the long-term.
Mm-hmm. Well, but it depends on whose point of view, because I guess from Netanyahu's maybe it does if it brings us closer to war. And I guess I worry that rather than just this blindness that you're talking about, that maybe they have a terrorist-type strategy in committing terrorist attacks like this. And that is, of course, with terrorism, it's the action is in the reaction, as the communists used to say. It's all about that blowback and provoking it. There's a headline about how the Iranian parliament, I don't know whether they have the power to do anything about this or not, but they said, well, maybe we ought to scale back our cooperation with the IAEA after the big bogus report came out last week and that kind of thing. And John Bolton famously told AIPAC, we're trying to get them to withdraw from the treaty and kick the inspectors out because that serves our agenda better if they would, put their hands down. Right now they have them up. And I worry that really that's the point, but maybe that's too smart by half for Benjamin Netanyahu. What do you think?
Well, I think that there are figures on both sides that want that are rejectionist and would prefer to resolve this by by fighting it out like boxers in a boxing ring.
I'm sorry. Hold it right there, Rich. We got to go after this break. We'll be right back. RichardSilverstein.com. All right, y'all. Welcome back to the show. It's Anti-War Radio here on the Liberty Radio Network. I'm talking with Richard Silverstein from the Tikun Olam blog, richardsilverstein.com. And again, he broke the story that Mossad and the Mujahideen MEK group were behind the bombing, supposed accident at an ammo depot that turned out to be sabotage in Iran the other day. And his story has now been confirmed by Time, The Guardian, Haaretz, Channel 10, and the BBC. I think what you said earlier on the show today, before the break. But where we left off, I was asking you whether you think maybe the purpose of this is try to provoke Iran from going ahead and making nukes, so that they have an excuse to go ahead and fight. Because that whole was it Ynet said all Netanyahu wants is to be Winston Churchill. You can't be Winston Churchill without a world war, can you?
Right, exactly. I think that Netanyahu does have this kind of megalomaniac approach that he's going to be David and slay the Iranian Goliath. There does seem to be that kind of mystical approach to these things, and of course Netanyahu believes that Iran is not just a threat to Israel but to the entire Jewish people. Although he never explains how Iran is going to wipe out all the Jews in the world. So, there is that element that is very dangerous. And what's interesting about this is that there are Israelis and supporters of Israel who demonize Iran and call them the mad mullahs and say that they're, they have this mystical vision. They'll take the world and bring it down in flames in order to advance their agenda. And then there are Iranians who demonize the West in the same way. So both sides, the worst of both sides, are kind of a mirror image for each other, which is kind of a strange notion to consider. And there was one other issue that I wanted to really emphasize here, and that is that the media is focusing justifiably on the Mossad involvement because the Mossad, everybody knows about the Mossad, and they know about Israel's reliance on spies and skullduggery and things like that. But we've got to focus also on the MEK here because the Mujahideen al-Haq is applying to get their status as a terrorist organization removed by the Treasury Department so that they can actively pursue their political agenda here in the U.S. And so far, the U.S. government has resisted that, although the Mujahideen are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to figures like Howard Dean and lots of neocons to get them to lobby Congress to remove this designation. But the fact that they were very involved in this attack in Iran means that they still are a terrorist organization, and their protestations that they're no longer a terrorist group really are blown to the winds by this act. Of course, what they'll argue is, we're the good guys, we're the good terrorists because we're engaged in terror on behalf of U.S. interests, and that's a really pernicious notion. Although we do have to say the U.S. does tend to be willing to engage in acts of terror like the assassination of Anwar al-Awlaki that you mentioned earlier in the show. So we also use terror when it's in our interest. Trita Parsi and the guys at the National Iranian American Council covered General McInerney, and he's saying, well, we want them delisted so that we can use them for terrorist attacks. And then you got Newt Gingrich just the other day saying, that's exactly what we need to do. Is he might as well have directly said the Mujahideen al-Haq, we need to blow up and assassinate things in Iran all the time. Yeah. That may be one of the things that's holding back the CIA from being more involved with the MEK, the fact that they are, they're designated as a terrorist group, and so removing them would be a terrible. They have zero
support inside Iran. They are considered traitors unanimously by the people of Iran.
Yeah, and that's true. And I know Iranian Americans here who are ardent opponents of the regime, and they won't have anything to do with the MEK. They are totally tainted. They're the equivalent of the Bay of Pigs guys who landed on the beach in 1961 trying to overthrow Castro. They just have no credibility inside Iran. They do have, however, lots of money from places like the Mossad, and they have lots of technological expertise that's offered to them, but that doesn't replace the fact that they have no grassroots following. You know, they're basically just a cult of radical extremists willing to use any tactic, no matter how immoral or illegal, to advance not just their own agenda, but the agenda of Western intelligence agencies against Iran.
Mm-hmm. Well, and, you know, doing things like blowing up a missile base, like you said, from a short-term point of view, that makes perfect sense. Hey, look, then they'll have less missiles, and some missiles minus some missiles equals fewer of them, and it's great.
Right.
And yet, what they're doing really is they could get us into a war. I mean, this could get us into a war right now as this story comes out. I'm not saying it probably will or whatever, but I'm saying that's the kind of thing that they're messing around with here.
Yeah.
They still got plenty of missiles to shoot, no matter how many little bases you blow up with MEK terrorists.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think back to 1962 and the Cuban Missile Crisis, it just would have taken one little match being lit at the wrong time to have turned that into a nuclear, confrontation. I mean, it was a nuclear confrontation, but I mean with actually missiles being launched and fired and exploding. So whoever is engaging in acts of sabotage and terrorism really is playing with fire, and it could turn it won't just, if it happens, it won't just be an attack between two countries, because Iran has all these proxies in Hezbollah and Hamas and these other groups that will join in if Iran is attacked. So it will become a regional war, and then the U.S. will be dragged in because we're Israel's primary backer, and we'll have to supply them with the weapons, the bunker buster bombs and the cluster bombs and everything. So we'll be in this too, and it just will be a catastrophic event if it happens. And these kinds of attacks in Iran that the Mossad and MEK did really take us really too close to that. You may remember that nuclear clock that they used to have during the Cold War, and it used to say we're 5 minutes to midnight because the nuclear powers are so close to war with each other. Well, there's a Middle East clock that I like to say, and the hands of the clock are way too close to midnight for my comfort, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially over a nuclear weapons program that doesn't exist. That story's just been falling apart all over the place. Again.
Yeah, and I think we have to point out about that. That's true. Is that while the world gets very excited about the possibility Iran wants a nuclear weapon, they forget the fact that Israel has anywhere between 200 and 400 nuclear warheads of its own, not to mention the U.S. arsenal. So, and then we've got North Korea, which has nuclear weapons, and Pakistan, which has nuclear weapons. So, if we, add that Iran may want to get a nuclear weapon, how much more dangerous can the world be than having a world where North Korea and Pakistan already have nuclear weapons?
Yeah, and India and America too, and China.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Hey, we got to go. Thanks so much. RichardSilverstein.com, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott.